Greetings, fellow humans. I am Hugh.
And I am Man.
And together we are definitely not
two kobolds in a trench coat.
We enjoy human activities, such as paying taxes,
having existential crises,
and RPG horror stories. Let's see what we've got today.
First up, we have a Game of Thrones story-style game ruined by misogyny and a DM's intention to steal characters to write a screenplay. And we have a cleric who made an improvised flashbang.
GM locked me out of interacting with other players because I got confused. By Reddit user Iceman EX54. I'm a player in a tabletop RPG campaign and I just wanted to vent about this session. The GM uses a rules-light homebrew system and it's his homebrew world as well. He's been doing this campaign for years now, but I just joined through a mutual friend after another player left recently. When I joined the campaign, the GM told me he wanted me to be from a particular country as a prince, and since it was his homebrew world, I went with it. The country I'm a prince of is a massive empire that has conquered many lands. I wanted to be a morally good character, so I made up a backstory where my prince had a secret romance with a commoner, so it gave me more empathy and understanding than my royal peers would have. Then, in session 1, he had the commoner immediately break up with me since the players were all leaving the city session 1. Several sessions later, there is a carnival being hosted in the Empire and all the players are attending. The players split up and my part began with my character watching as a mentally handicapped child was put in a dunk tank and was dunked against his will. So I had my character help the child and stop the game. This isn't relevant to the larger story, but I thought it was really weird. Then I am told I have to go to the main stage, which is just a strip club seemingly. And of course, walking around topless serving drinks is my character's commoner love interest that I made in session 0. The GM laughs a bit and comments, "Isn't it funny? Look at what your ex has to do without you." I have my character give her the shirt off his back, and we go to the outskirts of the carnival to find a quiet place to talk. But then, the carnival was ambushed by some enemies as arrows and fire rained down on the parade.
Alright, this is just bizarre. They're gonna have a love interest, but then they're gonna break up because they have to go on an adventure, and then you come back and, oh, she's a topless shots girl now. Ha. Why? Also, a mentally disabled kid getting dunked. I don't know, there's just a lot of details going on here it's very chaotic.
I mean, the whole setup isn't bad, but that established NPC who OP created as their partner in the story, for the DM to then have her just break up with him in session 1 because they're going adventuring without consulting him seems a little bit far-fetched. I get it, the DM runs the NPCs, even ones that are created with the players in session 0, but to create that kind of dynamic right off the bat feels like the DM has overstepped his boundaries.
Well, and that comment of like, oh, isn't it funny? See what she has to do without you? Like, you made that choice, DM. You were the one that forced it. So why are you then making it out like she has to be a shots girl because he went away? Like, that's the whole point. And they could have stayed together. Long distance relationships work, even in D&D. Also, who cares if she's a topless waitress?
At the moment, it's just guessing, but given our experience here, it might be showing how useless a woman is without her man, at least according to the DM. And of course, DM had to put this guy's ex-girlfriend in a position where she's objectified.
And then act like it's a bad thing, because it really isn't. Who cares? If she has to do that to make ends meet, power to her.
Suddenly, my character and his ex are teleported back to the main stage and the GM starts jumping back and forth between all the player characters, asking what we want to do without any sort of initiative. And if we don't respond quickly enough, he skips to another player. I ask, what direction are the arrows coming from? GM, you can't tell. Which direction is the palace? I ask. You don't know, he tells me. I'm honestly genuinely confused about what to do here, and my mind goes blank. But then GM has my bodyguard, a Brienne of Tarth type, tell me to follow her, so I do. As he cuts back and forth, another player loses his mom in the chaos. I tell GM, I want to help him find his mom. You can't see him, GM tells me. Then I ended up surrounded by 12 ambushers in the pleasure gardens. GM asked what I would do. I say since the carnival is burning, I look for a piece of wood on fire and since it's the pleasure gardens, maybe there's some oil I can spill and light on fire to separate myself, my bodyguard and ex who are all with me from the ambushers. He tells me there's no oil and then I'm held down by the men. I tried to escape, but he says I failed. He just did the dice roll behind the screen and didn't tell me the results. I am then hogtied by the ambushers with my bodyguard and X and thrown in a cart. Meanwhile, the other two players have stolen a cart and are escaping. I try to do a goofy wave as my character is tied up towards my companions and he just says, "The carts never pass each other, so the players don't see you." Before the session ends, he tells me my bodyguard is dead.
So that's just a whole lot of chaos right there. And it's one person, the DM, not the players for once.
I'm not so mad at the principles of what's going on here. Yep, ambush, attack, fine. This kind of thing is always quite early on in campaigns usually. Something like this can often happen. However, the player doesn't seem to be able to roll for anything. It is just the DM deciding what happens, and there's not really any opportunities to get out of it or do anything about it. This feels like a railroad. That's not a cart, that's a train.
And when they are given the opportunity to do something, they have to make up their mind super quick without any information, because the DM's saying, "Oh, you don't know where the arrows are coming from, and you don't know where the castle is. So what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Oh, you don't know what you're... Okay, we're gonna move on. Next person." Like, that's not how you run combat. You give people time, you let them do their thing. That's part of just how that works. And when you take out initiative and basically just look at them and tap your foot and go, "What are you going to do? What are you going to do?" Like, of course, nobody's going to know what they want to do. Their adrenaline's going and they're like, what? I don't know. It just doesn't sound like it would be fun for a lot of people, because you're not getting to really utilize your skills or sit and think and go, "Okay, what am I going to do?" and look at the information that you have in front of you and be strategic about it. You're just sort of like, I don't know, I swing wildly.
After the session, I think my body language showed I was a bit bummed. So GM pipes in, "You want to know why you failed that encounter?" He proceeded to tell me it was because I followed my bodyguard and there was no way a woman could have protected me and I needed to make the choice instead. Some of the other players chimed in and said it was surprising my bodyguard failed, since in the lore she was a 20-year veteran who survived the Great War. GM keeps defending his choice. Then he started making self-deprecating jokes about how he just sucks and he's the worst GM ever until the other players all reassure him it's fine. I kinda just sat there, shell-shocked. His system reduces dice rolls to a rarity, and he does them all himself as a way to keep the tension. I'm honestly more about hanging out with my friends than judging the quality of any campaign or system, but this was my first combat of any sort in the campaign, and I just felt so helpless in the system, and it was frustrating. Plus, there are no insight or persuasion rolls. What the GM claims, "my character would know," and how his NPCs would act. So I'm not sure how I was supposed to handle this encounter. Being a GM myself, I thought he was using my bodyguard's character to get me back on track, but I thought wrong. I honestly wouldn't have minded if he was just railroading me for a plot point, but him trying to manipulate me and saying his hands were tied, when he essentially locked me out of interacting with the other players for the rest of the session, is what bothers me the most.
And some good old-fashioned misogyny. I mean, how on earth is OP supposed to know not to follow a veteran bodyguard just because she's a woman?
He's exactly who he should be listening to in that situation. If he's a young prince and she's an experienced warrior with 2 decades of experience, including a big war, he's the one he's going to listen to in that situation. He's the expert.
It's just so ridiculous. Like, oh, you should know not to listen to a woman. Really? Because usually in that situation, and like OP said, hey, I DM, and in that situation, I would expect my players to listen to the NPC. And they're not even giving them a chance to like do an insight roll to see if I should be believing.
The complete lack of roles here is definitely a big problem. It took away almost all agency from the player. They had no real ability to influence their fate there, or even subjected to the chance of dice rolls. It was just, if you listen to the person you in reality should be listening to, bad things will happen. If you don't listen to her, good things will happen. That seemed to be the only choice the player really had here.
I guess the GM was just expecting him to be equally as misogynistic, so he just assumed that the player would just know not to listen to a woman.
Updates. GM defends style and told me he owns my character. From Iceman EX54. This is an update from my post a couple of weeks ago. One of my friends in the group reached out to me and asked me not to leave the group. He told me there were only 2 sessions left and asked me to stick around as a favour to him. I told him I'd reach out to the GM and see if we could get on the same page. So I texted the GM and told him I wanted to talk because I had some concerns after the way everything went down last session. He was down and we talked on the phone a couple of days later. To my surprise, the first thing he did was profusely apologize. I hadn't been responding in our group chat, partly because I was mad and partly because my partner had a death in her family. I guess me not responding caused him to dwell on the last session a bunch. He said he was going to try to retcon my bodyguard's death and keep her alive. I even told him that the treatment of women in the campaign was bad and that it was making the story worse. He told me it was something he can work on being better about too. I was surprised, but all of this gave me a lot of optimism for this conversation. I was honest and I told him that his homebrew system is very difficult for me since I don't have a character sheet. So my character doesn't have abilities, he doesn't level up, and I can't do things like roll investigation or perception rolls, which makes it hard for me to make informed decisions. I told him it makes me very risk averse because I don't have things like HP to even know if I'm in danger. He responded to this by telling me I shouldn't worry about that because his GM style rewards me if I roleplay well enough. He went on to say he hates systems with things like perception rolls because that's not how real life works.
Wait, so the guy doesn't have a character sheet? How do you function without a character sheet?
Does he even have a character here? I'm not even sure this is a player character anymore, and it feels more like just an NPC role-playing with the DM.
It's so weird. Oh, I don't like doing this because that's not how real life works. Yo, well, real life also isn't dressing up in armor and hitting and doing flash and like everything that has to do with a TTRPG.
I mean, it can be that. Why not? Why can't we dress up as knights and just go into town?
Listen, I'm down if you are. But in all seriousness, it's a tabletop role-playing game. It's a fantasy game. Of course, it's not going to be reflective of real life because we don't have character. Listen, I would love to have a character sheet for myself. Trust me. That would be so nice. But I don't. So I gotta go in blind.
I also lamented the fact that I also don't get to interact with the other players much. I didn't mention this in my first post, but he plays with all of us in a Discord call, but he only plays with us one at a time. And the two of us who aren't playing are expected to listen and record notable quotes for his notes. He'll switch between characters where each player gets 2 to 3 scenes in a 3-hour session. He has our characters all spread out across the country, Game of Thrones style, and I've only gotten to play with another player in 2 sessions so far. This was also why that carnival scene was so frustrating, because all 3 players were finally in the same place and we were trying to find each other, and he just kept saying, "You don't see them." He told me that he doesn't do party-based adventures because you can't get character growth that way. I pushed back and said I've seen awesome character growth in traditional D&D style games in the past. It just depends on the group. I also said he's just making things harder for himself by trying to run 3 campaigns instead of 1. And if we don't have character sheets and aren't in a party, then this is all more dramatic improv than tabletop RPG.
Yeah, I agree with OP there. If you don't have character sheets, you're not a part of a party, then yeah, this is dramatic improv. This isn't a TTRPG. And that's all fine and good, but don't tell somebody you're running a TTRPG and then don't run a TTRPG.
That kind of story style might work for the Song of Fire and Ice books. It doesn't work when you have multiple people playing a tabletop game together. The point is you're all playing together, and then you're just sitting around listening to other people play the game you're not a part of the rest of the time. Character development also happens best in the groups, I find, because your character growth comes from interacting with the other player characters and learning from them, and you're bonding together. That's where the growth comes from. You don't learn much on your own.
If you're writing a story, for example, having characters separated from one another totally works. Because you are the author, you have control over the character growth. But when you're playing a TTRPG and you have people that have independent thought and player agency, theoretically, then character growth is going to be massively stunted by not being with other players. By putting them in the group with one another, they play off of each other, they grow, they change, and they learn. That's how that works.
He responded by saying his way is better because it creates a real story and that I should be happy because he made me the main character. I guess that is what me being the prince means. He then went on a rant about how much he loves the game world he created, and he's very grateful that our characters brought it to life. But then he says that since it's his world, he feels like he owns our characters now. and that after the campaign, he wants us all to sign off on him using the characters to write books and a screenplay. And if we don't, he'd just change their names and do it anyway. He then thanks me and tells me this campaign is the main thing that has been stopping him from self-harm and going to dark places. Then he says he has to go, and he rushes to hang up before I can say anything else. I'm dumbfounded after that rapid-fire series of bombshells. I've known since the first few sessions that this was barely a TTRPG, but I got to hang out with my friends, so I didn't care what it was. It was nice to hang out with old friends a couple of times each month. Then the story got weird, and there was so much misogyny, and then I had a horrible session that caused my original post. Then in this conversation, he throws up even more red flags that I'm not blind to. But he is also planting a seed that he may self-harm without the campaign, which is not something I want on my conscience. I'm just exhausted at this point. TLDR, GM says that abilities and parties make TTRPGs worse, and he wants to use our characters to write books/movies after the campaign because he owns them since we're playing in his world. He says he may fall back into self-harm without the campaign, making me feel guilty for wanting to leave.
Okay, well, that took a dark turn.
There's the cliff.
Lord have mercy. Okay.
You mean Lord have Mercer?
I never take the name of Matt Mercer in vain. Where to start on this? Okay, let's just address the whole hurting oneself threatening situation. In case anybody was wondering, don't drop that bombshell ever when somebody's criticizing you and something that you're doing and saying, oh, but this is the only thing that's keeping me from doing X, Y, and Z that makes somebody uncomfortable or feel responsible for your mental health. Not okay.
You should absolutely seek help if you're feeling that way and reach out to friends. But bringing it up at that exact moment after you've just said how important the campaign is, when you're probably getting inclinations that a player is going to quit, and you've just said that you're going to use their characters for other stuff, is just manipulative. It's not about fixing your issues, it's about you getting what you want.
And we're not trying to diagnose anybody. We can't do any of that. Just want to make that disclaimer. A lot of us have had that one person in their life that has done similar things where they have basically made somebody else responsible for their mental health. That's not okay. All of that said, here's the thing. It sounds like the DM just really wanted to write a screenplay or a book or something. Just do it, man. If that's really what you wanted to do this whole time, then you should have just done that instead of dragging everybody else into this fake TTRPG that is nothing like a TTRPG.
It does sound like they just wanted to try and run the basic ideas for their book using real people just to see how it would play out. Hence the lack of agency the player had. No roles, just some very fundamental choices that didn't make sense.
And if that's what you want to do, fine, do that, but then be honest with your players about what the situation is. Or if you want to try out writing something, write it as a fanfic. Base it on somebody else's canon, and then do your own thing with it. It's really a great way to get into writing. Cleric creates improvised Flashbang. This story comes to us from one of our subscribers. If you have a horror story or even a fun story, send it to us to the email in the description below. Also, feel free to send us any jokes. So I'm just starting out my first campaign with 4 players, none of us with a whole lot of experience with D&D at this point. So we do a session 0 and sort all the character stuff out. And for the sake of this, the only one of import here is the group's Cleric. Game day comes and we start playing. They are on the road to a big city with a merchant caravan that's hired them to bring them to the nearby village. Along the way, they encounter a few highwaymen along the road that try to con the players out of money or food. Well, the fight ends up breaking out. Now, for a bit of context, I'd told them that out-of-the-box thinking in combat could be very beneficial in some situations. They've either downed or run off a few of the bandits, and the cleric says, hey, can I use a light spell to cast light on my hand and make an unarmed strike to slap the bandit leader, kind of make like a flashbang effect, temporarily blind the bandit? Now, I know this technically wouldn't exactly work all at once like this, but I liked the way the cleric was thinking of how to use their spells to help the group, so I said, screw it, go for it, not thinking that it was going to do a whole lot. Well, he rolled high and got a hit, and it was actually just enough to down the bandit entirely for everyone's surprise, and it is still one of the top moments I've had since we started playing D&D.
Yeah, well, that's creative. I mean, technically, I think light and an unarmed strike are two actions at once. Light is a very inconsequential cantrip, so I can appreciate clapping them together into a single turn to do that. Yeah, that's fun.
Listen, we all love a creative use of a spell. I mean, sure, fireball's fun and all, but what about a flashbang slap?
So you're saying the spell slaps?
Totally. Hey, Hugh.
Yes, man.
Where are you when a Vrock pushes you against a wall?
I don't know. Where are you?
Between a Vrock and a hard place.
And with that, we have definitely not been two kobolds in a trench coat. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and make the necessary sacrifices to Tiamat. We'll see you next time.